Something interesting is happening with this team right now, and it's not just about big plays or flashy headlines. It's about smart decisions, the kind that don't always get attention right away, but can completely change how a season unfolds. If you've been paying close attention, you can feel that things are being built in a very specific way, and it might be setting up something bigger than most people expect. If you agree or even disagree with this, make sure to hit that like button and drop your take in the comments. I'm curious to see where you stand on this situation. The Seattle Seahawks just made a decisive move that quietly says everything about how this front office is operating right now. And it starts with Jake Bobo staying in Seattle after the team chose to match the contract offer he received from the Jacksonville Jaguars, locking in a player who has become far more valuable than the box score might suggest. This wasn't just about keeping depth at wide receiver. This was about identity, about committing to a type of player that fits exactly what this coaching staff wants to build moving forward. Bobo is not your typical headline-grabbing wide receiver. He's not the guy demanding targets or chasing highlight reels every Sunday. But what he brings is something that winning teams consistently prioritize. He blocks, he plays special teams, he embraces the physical side of football, and more importantly, he does the kind of work that often goes unnoticed but directly impacts wins. And with a new offensive direction taking shape, that matters more than ever. There's a very clear indication here that offensive coordinator Brian Fleury wants wide receivers who are willing to do the dirty work, and Bobo fits that mold perfectly. You're talking about a player who will line up, engage defenders in the run game, contribute on punt and kick coverage, and still be a reliable option in key moments, especially in the red zone. That versatility is not easy to find, and it's even harder to retain at a team-friendly price. And that's where this move becomes even more interesting. The contract structure itself gives Seattle flexibility. The guaranteed money is manageable, the short-term cap impact is controlled, and if needed, the team has options down the line. But realistically, why would they even want to move on from a player like this? You're getting production, leadership, and scheme fit all in one package. What stands out even more is how this decision connects to a bigger pattern. This isn't an isolated move, it's part of a broader strategy that John Schneider has been executing throughout the offseason. Every decision seems calculated not just for immediate impact, but for long-term sustainability. And when you start stacking these moves together, a very clear picture emerges. Take the extension for Jaxon Smith-Njigba, for example. At first glance, the numbers jump off the page. A massive deal that resets the wide receiver market and places him at the top in terms of annual value. That alone would raise eyebrows, but when you actually break down the structure, it tells a completely different story. Because of how the contract is layered on top of his existing rookie deal and fifth-year option, the Seahawks are effectively spreading that money over a longer period. Instead of paying elite receiver money immediately, they've created a scenario where the average value becomes far more reasonable over time. When you factor in the steady rise of the salary cap, that deal could end up looking like a bargain sooner than people expect. So now you have a situation where Seattle keeps a high upside, ascending star in JSN, while also retaining a complementary piece like Bobo, who enhances the overall functionality of the offense. That balance is critical. It's not just about having stars, it's about having the right pieces around them. And this is where Schneider's approach deserves serious attention. He's not chasing flashy headlines, he's building a roster that makes sense. He's identifying players who fit specific roles, negotiating contracts that protect the team, and making sure that every move aligns with both present and future goals. Even beyond the offensive side, this philosophy continues to show up. Moves on defense, depth signings, contract decisions, all of it reflects a front office that understands value better than most. They're not overpaying for production, they can replicate at a lower cost, and they're not letting key contributors walk away without a plan in place. What makes the Bobo decision so compelling is that it represents the foundation of this entire strategy. It's about trusting development, rewarding effort, and keeping players who buy into the system. It sends a message to the locker room that doing the right things consistently will earn you a place on this team. And for fans, this is the kind of move that might not dominate headlines, but it should absolutely get your attention. Because these are the decisions that build championship-caliber teams over time. Not just the big signings, but the smart ones, the efficient ones, the ones that maximize every dollar and every roster spot. So when you look at the Seahawks right now, you're not just looking at a team trying to compete this season, you're looking at an organization positioning itself for sustained success. Keeping Jake Bobo might seem like a small piece of the puzzle, but in reality, it fits perfectly into a much larger picture that's being carefully constructed. And now the real question becomes, as all these moves start to come together and define the identity of this team, do you believe this was one of the smartest decisions of the offseason, or do you think the Seahawks should have taken a different approach with Jake Bobo? And when you keep following this trail of decisions, it becomes impossible to ignore how calculated everything has been, especially when you shift your focus to the defensive side of the ball, where the Seahawks quietly reinforced key areas without overspending, starting with the extension of linebacker Drake Thomas, a move that might not have generated national headlines but could end up being one of the most impactful deals on this roster. Because if you really look at what Thomas did last season, it's hard to argue against his value. This is a player who wasn't even expected to make the roster initially, worked his way into a starting role early in the season, and then became a central piece of a defense that helped drive this team all the way to a Super Bowl victory. He produced across the board, racking up tackles, making plays behind the line of scrimmage, contributing in coverage, and even delivering a game-sealing interception against the San Francisco 49ers in Week 18 that secured the #1 seed for Seattle. And what did the Seahawks do? They locked him in on a 2-year deal worth around $8 million, with incentives that could push it slightly higher. That's roughly starter-level production at a fraction of the typical cost. This is exactly the kind of efficiency that allows a team to stay competitive year after year without putting itself in a difficult cap situation. Then you move to the secondary, and the same pattern continues. Re-signing Josh Jobe to a 3-year, $24 million deal was another calculated decision that reflects a deep understanding of both scheme and value. Jobe proved he can handle a starting role, showing flashes of high-level play early in the season and maintaining solid consistency throughout. When you compare his production to what the Seahawks had in Trey Brown and others rotating in that role, it becomes clear why the front office made this choice. But the real story here is the comparison in cost versus output. Seattle essentially chose to invest in Jobe rather than committing significantly more money elsewhere, and based on the defensive system being run, the drop-off in performance is minimal, if it even exists at all. That's the kind of decision that doesn't just help you now, it preserves flexibility for future moves. And that flexibility becomes even more important when you consider one of the toughest losses this team faced, which was Kobe Bryant leaving for a 3-year, $40 million deal with the Chicago Bears. That's not an easy player to replace. Bryant developed into a leader, a reliable presence at safety, and someone who made a real difference on the field. Losing him could have created a major gap. But instead of overreacting and trying to match that contract, the Seahawks pivoted. They looked internally and trusted what they had in Ty Okada, a player who, while not identical to Bryant, offers a surprisingly similar level of production when given opportunities. The difference? Cost. Okada's deal comes in at just over $1 million, giving Seattle roughly 90 to 95% of the production at a fraction of the price. That's not just smart roster management, that's strategic discipline. It's understanding when to pay, when to pivot, and when to trust development. And when you combine that with everything else we've talked about, it becomes very clear that this front office isn't just reacting to the market, they're staying ahead of it. What might be the most interesting part of all this is what hasn't happened yet. The Seahawks have deliberately avoided making a splash in free agency so far, and that's not by accident. The plan appears to be centered around patience, specifically waiting until after June 1st to make any major additions, while also preserving valuable compensatory picks for the 2027 NFL Draft, which is already being projected as one of the strongest classes in years. So now you're looking at a team that has managed to retain key contributors, replace outgoing talent efficiently, maintain financial flexibility, and stockpile future assets all at the same time. That's not easy to pull off in today's NFL, where teams often sacrifice long-term stability for short-term gains. And maybe that's the biggest difference with this version of the Seahawks compared to past eras. This isn't just a team trying to make a run right now, even though they absolutely have the talent to do so. This is a team that's building something sustainable, something that can compete at a high level not just this season, but for multiple seasons to come. The foundation is there. The roster is balanced, the contracts make sense, and most importantly, there's a clear vision guiding every move. John Schneider didn't just keep this roster competitive, he elevated it while protecting the future. And if this trajectory continues, the Seahawks might not be looking at just one championship window, they could be setting themselves up for something much bigger. Now I want to hear from you, because this is where it gets really interesting for Seahawks fans everywhere. Are these the kind of moves that convince you this team is built for a long-term dynasty? Or do you still think there's one major piece missing before Seattle can truly dominate the league? If you made it this far, make sure to subscribe to the channel, drop a like on the video, and don't miss what's coming next, because the latest Seahawks updates are happening fast, and you're going to want to stay ahead of all of it. And if you see the video on your screen right now, go ahead and click it, because that's where you'll find the next big Seahawks story before anyone else. Go Seahawks!